Good morning. Thank you guys for coming out this morning. It is going to be an interesting day. I'm actually on here in the morning and then again on another panel, I think in the afternoon. So if you have any questions about stuff, I'll be here all day. The guys at FITC have put together a really great lineup of speakers, and some of the things that they do are really interesting topics. So I think that at the end of this, you will certainly get a ton of value from coming out to this particular event. So first, I'll do a quick introduction. Again, my name is Dayton Pereira. I am the founder of a company called Signal UX that's based out of Kitchener-Waterloo. I wasn't always in KW. I've only been there for 2 years. Prior to that, I was actually here in Toronto. This is my good old neighborhood. I ran a company called Indus Blue from 2000 to 2012. And the last time I actually did anything with FITC, I was much younger. I had hair. And the F in FITC stood for Flash, believe it or not. So anyways, I did that for a good 12 years, and then right after that, I shamelessly started another web dev shop called Pear-Shaped, and I ran that out of here in Toronto as well for 2 years before I finally moved to KW, not for business reasons, but because, well, I had a family of 2 and then suddenly 3, and we couldn't fit in our house. I help companies design great products for their employees, their customers, their sales folks, viewers, fans, people that use the stuff that they build. And Signal UX, different from the other businesses that I ran that were web development shops, is really focused on helping new digital products come to market using the truly disruptive power of design. And that's what I do. So as this is a UX event, you likely know quite a bit about the UX process already. Just maybe by a quick show of hands, how many folks do we have that are actually UX designers? Okay, and maybe product managers? Yeah, okay. Well, what do the rest of you do? Trying to be, okay. Who's trying to be a UX designer? Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so awesome. So I'll quickly summarize, the UX disciplines that you already know. I like to think that UX starts and ends with the user. So we have user research, where we're investigating and learning about the people that we're actually designing for. IA, which is an old world term, really, information architecture. No one says that anymore. But I'm an old guy, so I put it up there. Now the term is more popularized as UX design, and that's really what people think, or that's what people say, or that's what people mean when they say the word UX design. But in my opinion, UX design is actually all of that, not just one thing. Then, of course, it follows with visual design, making things pretty, typography, photos, photography, icons, color, all that other really great stuff. And then prototyping, and finally, testing. So is everybody familiar, more or less, with these things? Like, there's no surprises here, right? Great. Okay. So for the purposes of this presentation, I really focused on prototyping because what I believe is that prototyping is really where the magic of UX design actually comes together. And similar to magic, where you have assistants pretending to be members of the audience, you have lights and smoke and performance and orchestration, all of those things come together to create this illusion of something real so that your audience can get a reaction that is real, unlike the illusion that they saw. So too is prototyping. Well, that's what it's supposed to be, in my opinion, and others, not just mine. Nothing but an illusion or a facade of something that the user can only imagine to be true. But the reactions that they see or the reactions that they receive are real. And the reactions that they receive are the ones that we care about the most as designers, because we're not really looking for feedback. And I'll talk about this in a second, like the difference between feedback and reaction. We're not looking for a ton of feedback telling us to do this or do that. We're really looking for their actual reactions. There's an agenda, if I'm kind of organized. This is the stuff that we're going to cover. Why should you prototype? What and when, some do's and don'ts, and the time it takes to actually run one of them, and some tools. And then a bunch of stories along the way. Okay, so why do we prototype? So the answer seems so obvious that you even wonder why we ask the question. And yet, I've worked on dozens of projects where we didn't prototype anything. It was essentially, yeah, this sounds cool. Let's just go ahead and make that. Or we hear from some director or C-level executive saying, this is what we want to do, and let's just go ahead and build that. I'll give you a quick example of something that I had built a few years ago. It had to do with creating an application that would listen to audio that would come from the TV and synchronize content automatically on your phone. Because the assumption or presumption was that people, while watching TV, also screwed around with their phones, and the idea was, let's connect some of that TV content and make it phone content, and that'll be really interesting. So we spent a ridiculous amount of time for a TV show that super popular in its 25th season now, I think. It was Survivor for Global TV. And we built this thing, spent a ridiculous amount of time and money and energy, only to discover that nobody gave a shit. And what we could have done, in fact, what we did do was we did research, but the research was really not valid research. It was research based on what people do when they're watching TV. They use their phones, duh. But they don't use their phones to try to consume more TV content. They use their phones to be distracted from the stuff that they're watching. But we converted that research, which was valid, into something that we wanted to believe. And the we was the global we, myself included, but it really came down from the exec level. But when it does that, sometimes you just get wrapped up into this stuff, and that's just what happens. So a word of advice about why to prototype: it's because your gut is almost always wrong when it comes to design. Don't go with your gut. Go with your gut when you're falling in love and whatnot. But when it comes to design, there's no room for going with your gut, unless, of course, your last name is Jobs. Then maybe. But for the mere mortals that we are, do some research. So in the world where everybody is trying to create the next Uber of this and the Facebook of that, going with your gut is really a reckless waste of time and everybody's money. So don't do that. So I thought of doing a little prototype here. It's not a technical prototype, but it's a poll prototype. And this is a bit of an audience participation event. I have no idea if it's going to work, but we're going to find out in the next 30 seconds. So I'm going to ask you a poll question, and the responses are going to be, oh yeah, uh-huh, and boom shakalaka, okay? So In the next question, we're going to try it out. We're going to see if it works. If it fails, it fails. But this is an experiment, as we do all the time. So this color that you can barely see is Pantone 448C. It is voted the world's ugliest color. It's kind of like the pants that I'm wearing that I didn't plan on doing at all. But this is what it happens to be. So I wanted to ask a simple poll question that we're going to practice, maybe get the blood flowing because it's so early in the morning at almost 10:30. But it's a Saturday, so I expect you slept in. So when I say the first option, if you think that that is it, you respond with, oh yeah. Okay, simple, pretty straightforward. Okay, so Pantone 448C reminds you most of the color of a ground-up portobello mushroom. Wow, okay. It's good this is only a test question. Okay. How about chocolate cake batter? Mm-hmm. Right. And what about dirt? All right. So that kind of worked, maybe. All right. So a more serious question now, and you really have to look at the answers because they're all deceptively similar. What is the primary reason we prototype? So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to actually read the question. Guys done? Okay, so I'm going to read it out. The primary reason to prototype, and for those of you who agree with the first answer, to demonstrate the functionality of your software to stakeholders. Who thinks that this is the reason we prototype? No one. Okay, very cool. Interesting. Okay, how about to get a feel for the product you designed when it's stitched together in a cohesive experience? Sounds legit, right? I would vote for that one. Right? All right. And the last one, to use human reaction to validate your ideas when tested on real people. Damn it. It was not deceptive at all. All right. Anyways, I don't think there are really any wrong answers to that particular question. The prototypes do achieve them all, and sometimes, depending on the context, you might actually choose the first one. So imagine if you're creating a prototype in an RFP response, right? So you're going to respond to somebody, but your audience in that circumstance is not necessarily users that can actually use your software, but it actually happens to be this RFP, sort of this veil of folks behind the decision panel to choose your company for that business. But you could still create a prototype as a response to that. So it could be that. In the second one, get a feel for the product you design when it's stitched together in a cohesive experience. Well, yeah, that's totally what we do all the time as designers. We try to put that stuff together constantly to validate just how maybe the product feels. But the last one is most definitely why we really prototype, and it's the end game, it's the end result of actually running a prototype. So, and remember why we do it, because the process of user experience starts and ends with the user. A couple more things on this particular slide. Remember that what we're always trying to do when prototyping is really reducing the risk. When we're building new products or building new features of products, you are creating something that no one has ever used before, and in order for you to reduce the risk of that being not so great, you test on real people. So you can avoid building stuff that, like in the example I described before with the Survivor app, nobody really wants, which was really unfortunate. Okay, so what do you prototype? I've seen prototypes of all shapes and sizes and sort of levels of fidelity, complexity. I've been responsible for creating things that I called a prototype when it really wasn't a prototype at all. In fact, it was a full-blown app, back end, front end, like everything. And we called it a prototype. And that kind of happens a lot, especially when when a big part of your team is a dev shop, like the ones that I ran. You kind of say, well, what are the skills that we have internally? Well, we're a bunch of engineers, so let's just make the thing. You don't need to test it on real people with like bubblegum and tape. But this is precisely when you use bubblegum and tape. These are the best tools for prototyping. Because really what you're trying to do with your prototype is validating your idea or hypothesis. And if you can do the job with the fewest amount of tools and time, you've actually succeeded. So has anybody read the book Sprint by the folks at Google Ventures? Maybe the Shopify guys. I saw them here. There they are. You must have. No? If you didn't, you should. So the design team at Google Ventures developed a process called a design sprint. And they describe what the fidelity or what the quality of your prototype should actually be. And they call it the Goldilocks quality, which is why you see this picture here. So not too hot, not too cold, but just right, the just right prototype. Yeah, this is what I thought when I read that part. I didn't understand what that meant. So in order to answer the question of what is a just right prototype, because it's completely subjective and really different from everybody, from one person to another, we go back to the reason we're writing a prototype in the first place: to validate ideas and get real reactions. So what you have to do is, all you have to do really is to create a facade or an illusion of something that you're creating. And if you've created a good enough facade, you should just stop and run a test. I'm a designer. I've been one for a really long time. Designer, developer, like all kinds of stuff. Motion graphics guy, it's craziness. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of overdoing it. I often obsess about the really small nitty-gritty things. Little pixel here, color there, typography choice there. Should I have rounded corners? Should they be 6 pixels in radius or 9 pixels? Like stupid shit that really doesn't matter. But ultimately what happens is what you really should be thinking, in fact, what I recommend is printing it on the wall and sticking it up there as your mission for that particular prototype. You're on a mission to discover something, and every minute that you spend wasting your time doing something that doesn't achieve that particular mission is time gone that you won't be able to get back. So a couple of things to define a just right prototype. Is it believable? Not to yourself, because you'll probably think it's unbelievable. Is it believable to your audience? Does it address the problem to be validated? And how attached are you to it? This is an interesting one, the last one. How do I describe it? The longer you take on something, the more you fall in love with it. The less likely it is to throw away, right? You work on some design, and you work on it, and you work on it, and then you present it to somebody, and they don't like it. Then the first reaction is, oh, you don't know anything, moron. I used to do this all the time. It's your classic egotistical designer. Prototypes are exactly the same way. So the longer you work on this stuff, the less and less receptive you are to receive feedback, especially the ones that are critical. And it's the critical feedback that is the one that you actually value the most, because it is not achieving the needs of the product that you're actually trying to design. So if you think of a graph where time and time against reluctance to change, it goes like this or like this, whatever. It goes some way. But essentially, the longer you take, the more reluctant you are to discard it, and the more reluctant you are to receive feedback. So if you take a long stretch of time, you're essentially saying, well, users are morons when you receive the feedback, instead of looking at it and saying, well, yeah, that probably makes sense. I can give you an example. I built a website for a sports company, a sports media company, TSN actually. And one of the things that we had done for them when we redesigned the platform was display stats data, right? Scores and shootouts and analytics and data and all kinds of stuff. And when you look at some of the new sort of modern design things, it's all about leaving space. And you look at a design for, if you do any research on a table design, you'll see the table design should have really big fat padding and all kinds of really interesting things. And you're like, okay, well, this is the design convention. Let's totally use that on these gigantic, 60-row lines of data. And the feedback we started to receive was, why is there so much space? I can't read anything. And our immediate reaction, because we had taken months to make this thing, was, they don't know anything. We're the designers. We know more. But when in reality, it's really about they wanted less space so that they can consume more data on their small screens. Again, stuff like this seems so obvious. But when you read up on Medium and Dribble, and you see all of these design patterns of how tables should be designed with like really big fat padding, it's not true, because they're not validating that use case against the continuous variable that is your audience. So the one shoe really doesn't fit all. That was a long time on that slide. Okay. So there's some really simple do's and don'ts. You want to prototype stuff on the big idea, okay, the big complex thing. That's really where you want to focus your efforts, and I'll show you an example later, and I'll talk about it really quickly right now. So if you're building a new, well, what I'm working on right now, I'm building a new video clipping service. Okay, you upload a video, and then you can create little clips shared with people, create a little fun dialogue, all kinds of things. If you're doing that, that is likely something that isn't a well-documented design pattern, and it's something that you might want to test, because there are a few things that, a few options or a few ways that you can actually pull that off. And it's part of your big product offering. So that's something that you would prototype. That's an example. Be in the medium of the final product. Now this one really seems obvious, right? If you're going to build a screen-based product on a desktop, we'll do a desktop prototype. Yeah, obviously. But it doesn't always happen. In fact, I think there's still a lot of people that do, or there's still some sort of schools of thought that consider paper prototyping to be useful, where your screen is actually on a sheet of paper. And for you to convince your audience that that sheet of paper is a screen and your rubber stamp is the mouse clicking on it, that is, you're not really suspending disbelief at that point. That's what Jacob Nielsen says, by the way. Rubber stamps and paper prototypes. But whatever. So mobile apps on phones, websites on computers, packages in boxes. Like if you're doing something like an unboxing experience, you can actually prototype that. Pretty interesting. And robots. Have colors and photos if necessary, because again, you're trying to make something look actually real. And of all of these do's, I think this fourth one is probably my most important one. Words are critical. There's no prototype. There's no one in the world outside of this room and outside of our industry that knows what the hell lorem ipsum means. And every time I've had a prototype that included lorem ipsum, people thought that it was for a different language segment. It's like, we're not Italian. And as soon as you do that, the reaction you're receiving is not that of your product, but it's the reaction of people not understanding what you're trying to deliver them. Words are critical. If you're not a copywriter, it doesn't matter. Write some stuff down that you think is meaningful, and then iterate and edit that. But no, lorem ipsum just should be banned. In fact, all those lorem ipsum plugins, just totally useless. Write real content. And it's hard. It is hard to write real content when you think that you're the designer responsible for the look of things, but not for the way that things sound. You're responsible for that too. Progressively increase the fidelity of your prototype. So prototyping is not a one-shot deal. You do it often and as frequently as possible. Whenever you're trying to validate something or you run a test and it fails, do another one. But if you've got some assets that you can reuse them and make them a little bit better. Don't spend months building the actual. Another little story here. Coming off that Survivor project that we worked on, this is in 2012 now, we thought, well, that was an interesting project. It had some legs to it. It looked like somebody actually spent some money on it. Maybe we can productize this thing and create something similar. Because we thought that the validation of a big giant TV company doing it was enough validation. So we call this product Synchro, and it was designed to synchronize producer-based content with live television. So if there's a TV show, or it was really designed around live content and live sports or live events. And if you had this reality type content up there, there'd be a producer in the background typing away and generating new content, and it would show up on your phone. So we thought it was going to be an awesome idea. And we spent 4 months building it, like heads down, writing it in Rails. We built the front end in Ruby Motion, which is kind of a crazy choice, but that's what we did anyways. And then we took our demo, like our working piece of software, and we walked around and met with every media company, and they all saw it, and they all took 2 seconds actually holding our working software that we worked so hard on for 4 months to make a decision that, nah, it's not really that great. Thanks, though. And we could have received all of that if we had just created like 3 screens in a PowerPoint deck would have been perfect. But instead, because we had this developer mindset, that we will look more, we will be more credible if we actually have real working software. The truth was that our credibility had nothing to do with building software. We're a dev shop. That's what we're supposed to do. Our credibility really belongs in the area of, is this something that people will use? And that's the difference between spending time on something. And that was the big difference there. And it turned out that people didn't use it. So waste of time and money, but shameless lessons learned. So how long should it take? So if you're running a design sprint, any guesses on how long it should take? How long you should take to build a prototype? No. You get 7 hours. If you're running a design sprint, you get 1 day. That's it. 1 day to take everything that you've learned in the first 3 and then mash it all together into one, right? So that's if you're running a design sprint. Now, not every process is running a design sprint, but I highly recommend it if you've never tried it. It's intense. It's like boot camp. It's hardcore, but great. So if you're in the initial stages of building a new product or feature, running a design sprint, your prototype should take as short time as possible. In fact, it's the only time you do have. The sprint is designed for 5 days, and the 4th day, the Thursday, is prototyping day, and the 5th day is testing. But let's take a different situation. where you have successfully validated your big ideas and in a sprint or whatever other exercise, and you know that your users are going to love it. And now you want to take what you've learned and you want to iterate on your design. You want to increase its fidelity. You want to do something a little bit more complex. The motivation is still to do something in a short amount of time, but what is it? How much time, and what do you need? So that's when you need a bunch of tools. So in the prior experience, the tools are really, you don't need that many things. You need something like PowerPoint. You could use Keynote. You could use InVision. If everybody's more or less a designer, you can use Sketch or Photoshop, and that's pretty much it. But there's this other sort of more complex side to prototyping. It's not significantly complex, but there are you might have to bring in some help. You might have to bring in the help of a designer, maybe a developer. You need to shell out some dollar bills for some software, depending on the kind of prototype that you're trying to build. But again, the theme is the same. Validate for reactions, use as little time as possible, and build a facade, but this time a badass one. Okay? And it's in this category where the industry has just exploded. We've got a lot of tools. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what some of them are. So I just picked 8 in 4 different categories. So, like, is everybody familiar with all of these? Is there some random looking ones probably? Okay, I'll talk to you about them. Okay, so InVision, everyone, right? No big deal. Uxpin, a couple people maybe. Over here, so in the InVision category, it's more like desktop software that's putting screens together. When I first saw InVision, it was like, wow, what a crazy program. Image maps and HTML. That seems so simple. But really, really useful for its ease of putting stuff together. Over here in the top right, you have Form and Origami. Those are prototyping tools that use a process called signal and flow. So it's kind of like a flow chart where you put logic in each one of these little groups, and then you bind that to another component. You can do ridiculously cool things with them. I think Form was bought by Google and Origami by Facebook. Very interesting. If you're interested in looking at a project that was created with Form, it's in the references at the end of the slide. It's called the Facebook Camera project, kick-ass. And then you have these desktop programs like Principle and Pixate on the bottom left that designers like a lot as well because there is no programming. It's mostly drag and drop, and you can set properties and whatnot. Its user experience is similar to, I won't say After Effects because that is complicated as all hell. It's probably similar to like a Photoshop, but with actions and tools that you can make things move. And then finally, if you have programming skills, then you can build your prototypes in HTML and CSS. And then with this guy, that's Framer, that I really like personally, you write it in CoffeeScript in a little environment. So I'm going to quickly jump out of this presentation to just show you what a Framer prototype looks like. Because remember I talked about that video clipping thing? I'm just going to show you really quickly what that looks like. Oh, crap. Sorry, give me a second here. Okay, so ignore all this code on the left. It's not really important. But the idea here was to prototype a screen that has a video playing at the top, your standard video transport controls at the bottom, but with the addition of a service that will allow you to clip something. And you can see that the fidelity of this prototype is actually quite high. I can scroll up and down, and it's bouncy and stuff. It feels like an app. And then I wanted to really investigate what things look like when you click on this little scissor and how you might perform this clipping action. So you click on this little scissor here, you build this little thing, you can drag this around, you can increase the scale of this. This is a prototype. What I like about Framer is that if you know how to code, if you know some JavaScript, CoffeeScript is pretty straightforward. But more than that, this product is self-contained. There's no npm this, there's no gulp, no grunt, none of these crazy tools that you have to use where you're trying to set up your environment before you can do anything. You turn it on, you write some code, you publish it. This prototype took me 4 hours to make. So in the theme of prototyping, it was pretty quick. Where'd my mouse go? Alrighty. And okay, so back to this. So a quick recap, because I think we're almost out of time. Why prototyping is used to validate big, bold ideas. Remember that the actual prototype is not meant to be the real thing. You don't want to prototype 75 screens. You have a short amount of time to run your user test, maybe 15 minutes at the tops. Prototype the stuff that is most useful and create a facade of it. Don't spend an inordinate amount of time building the actual software. You're not going to get the kind of reactions that you want as early as possible. The cost of a prototype should be 10 to 50 times less than making the real thing. And that kind of looks surprising, but if you think about it, that video clipping thing that I just showed you, that was going to take my dev team right now, I already know this, 2 months to make. And if we were just going to spend all that time to make that little prototype that I did in 4 hours, well, you can do the math, right? 2 months versus 4 hours. That's like 120 times longer because it's complicated. The best time to prototype is when you don't know. So when there's doubt, when you have competing ideas, you've got more than one, maybe 2 or 3, or when you're just about to go with your gut, you can stop yourself and say, no, let me test this out. Let me be mature enough to know that I don't know the answer, because remember, your user is your continuous variable, and just because your users, just because one product from some other market works on one group of users, that doesn't mean that's going to work on yours. Tools, early stage prototypes don't need a ton of new skills. High fidelity ones, they can. So maybe recruit some of the people that you need, or learn some new skills that will allow you to prototype with some more complex technologies. There are certainly lots to choose from. And finally, the poll prototype that I ran, I think it kind of worked. It was kind of fun. I liked it, right? Yay or nay? Yay. That's awesome. So some of the things that references that I think you should use are really valid. Read the first 2 books, Lean UX by Jeff Gotthelf, amazing. In fact, the entire Lean Everything series is just fantastic. Design Sprints by Jake Knapp from Google Ventures, again, amazing. The tools, Framer.js, I really like a lot. But then there's also Principle. InVision is sort of an industry standard now. I run, if you're ever in KW for whatever random reason, I run the Kitchen of Prototyping workshops, so you can join them. There's actually a Framer one that's here in Toronto as well, that I might be heading up. We'll see. I have to volunteer it. And read the article about the Facebook camera project on Medium. It is absolutely fantastic. Really deep insights on understanding what the user would do, and just the result is awesome. And that's a wrap. If you have any questions, you can find me here. Oh, I could put my phone number up there too if you want to text me or whatever. I don't care. It's on my website. I'm so easy to reach, it's kind of ridiculous. So CRA is always after me. Anyways, if anybody has any questions, I don't know how much time I have. I got 2 minutes. But again, I'll be here all day. There's another panel in the afternoon. I'll be here for that too. And I'll be watching the rest of the presentations with you guys. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, ask me later. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah?
On your video mock-up,
Yeah?
sorry, I just had an idea for it. The timeline,
Yeah?
I would almost invert the opacity so that the part you were clipping was the fully transparent.
The fully transparent? Yeah, sure.
Parts were darker.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That is definitely a great idea. We haven't built it yet, so see, we can try it now. We can try all kinds of things. And an experiment like that would actually be really cheap.
So after you prototype
Yeah.
your mock-ups, how many people do you typically bring in to do the testing?
So there's this study about sort of the number of people, the value of having too many people. But again, the answer is 5. You need 5 people. After those 5, and remember, you're trying to prototype a very specific thing. You're not trying to prototype 45 different features. You want to really do one at a time, one big killer feature. And after 5, you'll start recognizing patterns. You'll recognize if people get it or don't get it. So yeah, 5. It's pretty cheap, right? 5 people. Like, how hard is it to find 5 people?
Would you involve your client directly in the sprint, like in the 5 days?
Oh yeah. They have to work. In fact, they hate that part. I think the hardest part of running a design sprint is getting commitment from the decision makers and the team to actually put away their phones and computers for 5 straight days. If no one heard, the question was what was the question? Say it again. Do you involve clients in the design sprint? Absolutely. In fact, the most of the work that I as a designer do during that sprint is facilitation. It's making sure that, because we're not the experts of their business, right? We aren't experts in accounting. Because I'm working on a project right now. It's like tax audit, accounting audit, and we're creating some automation in auditing. I don't know anything about accounting. So it's really important that they are the experts, and we're going to take ideas from them and build a product for them. I think that's about it. Thank you, everybody.